And I think it's time to give the floor to I was going to say the sponsor, but in fact it's not the sponsor, but the organizers, Sitra, because Mr. Mikko Kosonen is the Executive Vice President of Sitra. He comes from Nokia, a company which may be slightly better known than Sitra abroad, and now has joined this organization as the head of the innovation unit and programs. Innovation, of course, is the word we Finns swear by now, as the previous speaker also pointed out. So the floor is yours. Let's innovate.
Thank you, Erkki, and good late morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and dear colleagues. First of all, on behalf of Sitra, I would like to thank you very much for joining us this morning, because it's a great honor for us and it's a very important topic. We will not resolve it all here during today, but triggering some important discussion already is the first step. Unlike the first speakers this morning, I'm not going to paint you the future picture of this industry, as I'm not an expert on this field at all. Instead, I'm going to talk about another important topic which we are here addressing, but I'm talking about it in a more generic manner. I'm talking about systemic change and the role of Sitra in systemic change, as well as of some of the capabilities public institutions and private companies need in addressing systemic changes and in general in coping with fast changing complex environment. So I'm talking about those capabilities we need to weave into the organizational culture and fabric of our organizations to cope with fast changing world. Let me start first of all by what do I mean with systemic change, using a framework here that we have put in place in Sitra. Simply put, I'm speaking about we're talking about wicked problems that cannot be resolved by any one single actor, but which always requires kind of well-aligned, coordinated, and balanced actions by many parties across the society and at all levels in society. So this is really a definition for a systemic challenge, systemic problem, systemic change that we are facing. For instance, with the topic that we are talking about here today, and addressing these systemic challenges requires really a shared vision based on a good foresight. That's the first step to understand the reality around us. We also need to kind of define and understand the overall architecture for the question or issue, phenomena in question. What are the causalities and links between the different elements in the problem? And of course, we also then need, in addressing systemic changes, to experiment, because nobody really knows for sure how the world will unfold. We need to experiment and test our architecture and vision all the time as we proceed and really kind of implementing full scale the solutions for the problem. And this is really what Sitra is all about. This is Sitra's business. Sitra is an enabler of systemic change in the Finnish society. As a public fund today of some endowment capital being of nearly 800 million euros, Sitra is an independent actor, orchestrator that can pull together different parties. Sitra can have a long-term view and take risks and act fast if needed and when needed. And Sitra is nowadays playing an active role as a change agent in many systemic problems. One was already mentioned this morning by Anu Harkki. The food and nutrition program is just ending. That's just one example. We are also actively involved in healthcare, which is another systemic challenge for Finland. Energy, changing the Energy kind of ways of energy consumption is another kind of systemic challenge. Municipal services, another third or fourth main challenge for Finland, as well as then mechanical industry. We're working with particularly the SMEs and subcontractors in mechanical industry. They are just example of systemic changes that Sitra tries to facilitate in the Finnish society by providing inputs in all these 4 quadrants of the framework I show you. And in addition to that, we are currently kind of considering going into 2 other programs, one of them being very close to today's topic, and that is kind of rural area development, the future, and the other one also being nearby, which is public sector leadership in general. So these are really the activities we are involved in today. And how is this really now, if we look at today's problem and challenge, which is certainly systemic by nature, we are involved now, as I mentioned already, in the natural resources strategy is one piece of work that by which Sitra is addressing this systemic change that we are here talking about. And the potential new program in rural area development is another one where the focus should be on the optimal resource utilization and new business opportunities in this field. And of course, all these activities that Sitra is now involved have to be closely linked with other kind of national kind of strategies that we are now having in place or started in around food strategy and then the biotechnical strategy. All of these kind of different strategies have to be well aligned. We have to develop a balanced view on those in order to really address this challenge together. What does it then require from individual actors, organizations, to really cope with, adapt, and even drive systemic change? It requires, as I call it, strategic agility, renewal capability from the organization in question, either public or private one. Unfortunately, this renewal capability is very hard to sustain. Most organizations lose it over time. They focus on operational excellence, efficiency, and they rigidify. They don't see any more changes happening. Their structures are very rigid. They don't kind of bend anywhere. Organizations are just typically good at one thing at a time, and they can improve that one thing, but they are not good at in transforming their core activity or business into another one, into a new paradigm. And that's where strategic agility is needed, but unfortunately most organizations lose it over time and become very rigid. Strategic agility, as I have defined it together with Professor Yves Doss from INSEAD. We conducted a research around this topic some time ago, and we found kind of 3 dimensions that all organizations, private, public, or even nations, have to have in order to address systemic changes and cope with complex, fast-changing environment. You need three kind of meta capabilities, I would say. One is strategic sensitivity. Organizations' capability to see and frame opportunities and threats in a fresh way as they emerge. They need resource fluidity, which is the capability for fast and efficient resource mobilization and redeployment, so that the resources are not stuck in wrong places. And they need, most importantly, leadership unity, collective decision-making and commitment from the top team, so that the top management is not struggling and playing political games. But as I said, most organizations lose these capabilities over time. So they become victims of their own success. They are good at doing one thing, but only that one thing. Their strategic sensitivity starts to erode over time. They fall victims to tunnel vision, strategic myopia, tyranny of the core activity or business, not giving enough room for new opportunities and experiments to flourish. Also, their resources are imprisoned in different type of organizational silos. They cement their kind of activity systems with different type of information systems which cannot be changed, and they have different ties that bind to their customers and partners. Hence, they cannot really move and change. Their resources are stuck. And finally, also, you could say that management grows apart. They are starting to play political games. Their egos step on or become obstacles of real dialogue and discussion. And overall, the strategic renewal capability, agility of organizations over time erode and vanish. Unfortunately, exactly when it would be mostly needed. When the new business paradigm changes, organizations don't have it. And this is what we are talking about here. Most of the organizations that in this industry as well are suffering from this kind of a strategic paralysis, strategic rigidity. They don't know. They do see that change have to happen, but they're stuck, and their management cannot move. What are then some of the capabilities that organizations have to weave into their organizational culture and in order to cope with change and to drive systemic changes? I will only briefly kind of touch on a few of them. First of all, organizations have to open up. They have to have a very kind of, as we call it, open strategy process. They have to connect with different kind of stakeholders, have a kind of strategize with different stakeholders, partners, customers, think tanks, universities, etc., to really understand what's happening around the organizations. Oftentimes they are too narrow-minded. They need to also experiment new business models, new technologies, new ways of working. Organizations should not either be afraid of stretched and conflicting targets, because they help kind of organizations, different units, to kind of meet its kind of conflicts and tensions are the kind of the source for innovation. Alignment is not a source for innovation. Conflicts and tensions create kind of necessary dialogue and discussion, which is the source of new innovations and new business models. And also high quality internal dialogue is needed, and there I would mainly emphasize cognitive diversity, so that in organizations should pay attention to having different type of people who think differently in the top team, not people that think similarly. It's easy to cope with people who think similarly, but it leads to group thinking and just continuing what you know best, and in your comfort zone continue doing what you have always been doing. But cognitive diversity brings kind of new innovation. Resource fluidity, there it's very important in private as well as public companies to really kind of apply this principle where it dissociates business results from resource ownership, meaning that the silos in different organizations do not need to own all their resources to get their results done. Many let's say very competitive organizations, the best companies in the world, have designed very multidimensional organizations of many dimensional matrices, and they can cope with them. And in those matrix organizations, the business leaders do not own all the resources that they need, and that way you also break the silos when you don't have the ownership of the organization, because that's the root cause for organizational silos, is this resource ownership. Job rotation is extremely important principle to put in place in both public and private organizations to force organization to learn and to individuals to learn. And finally, also the organizational architectures that organizations put in place is very important, because if you design your information systems, for instance, and business processes in a wrong way according to organizations, you just bring and cement the kind of the old structures and make it very difficult to change these. There are many different ways of addressing these problems if you want. And finally, it's very important in the top teams of any organization at the kind of national level or public institutions as well as in private companies to have top team which carries kind of cabinet responsibility, which is not that doesn't mean a lack of accountability, but where the top team has the identity of the whole entity, not where they are not representatives of their individual kind of subunits, where they just kind of try to kind of drive the kind of the benefits of that unit, but where they are joining together, a top team meeting to develop the future of the whole. And aligned kind of corporate-wide or institution-wide incentives are, of course, very good, simple vehicle for building collective commitment and cabinet responsibility. It's also very important that the top team can really, as I said, can have a real dialogue. We have to move from this kind of debate and consensus decision-making culture to dialogue and conflict-based decision-making culture. Because, as I said earlier, conflicts are good. Dialogue is good. When you combine dialoguing capabilities with conflicts, then you can make real kind of new decisions. You are not just making consensus decisions where nobody is truly in their heart committed. And finally, it requires new type of leadership. I don't have time to spend too much time on this, but the modern organizations and companies are not anymore old-fashioned hierarchies. They are networks where the leaders are really kind of the people who can make their organizations and their subordinates really flourish and innovate, and they have to be part of the team. They are not the people who hide behind their positional power. I just kind of very briefly went through some of these capabilities that organizations have to have in place in order to cope with change in the fast-changing, complex environment, and when they need to cope with systemic change. So we need to have systemic change. All these bigger challenges that we are facing today in the world, including the ones we have discussed today, are systemic by nature. It requires aligned collaboration with different parties. And these different parties, they have to have strategic agility to cope with the system. And that requires to put in some of those capabilities that I just shared with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.